Hello there, fellow seekers of hidden truths. Before we dive into today's story, I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the mysteries that history forgot. If you enjoy exploring these forgotten chapters and alternative theories about our past, please consider subscribing to Sleep Theories. Your support helps us continue uncovering the stories they don't want you to know. But before we begin, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think about the conspiracy we're exploring today. Do you believe there's truth hidden in these alternative histories? Have you noticed any unexplained architecture or historical anomalies in your own area? And most importantly, what conspiracy or hidden mystery would you like us to investigate next? Your suggestions help shape our future episodes, so don't be shy about sharing your thoughts and theories. Now let's begin our tale of discovery, conspiracy and lost civilizations. The musty air of the Tartu Historical Archive carried the weight of centuries, each dust mote dancing in the amber afternoon light like secrets waiting to be discovered. Dr. Marrick had spent the better part of 3 weeks cataloguing forgotten documents in the university's basement archives, part of a modernisation effort that would digitise Estonia's most precious historical materials. It was tedious work, but for a historian and cartographer of his calibre, every yellowed page held the potential for revelation. Elian was 42, with the kind of weathered hands that spoke of years spent handling ancient parchments, and the sharp eyes of someone who had learned to read between the lines of official histories. His reputation at the University of Tartu was built on his ability to find connections others missed, to piece together fragments of the past that painted pictures far different from accepted narratives. On this particular Tuesday in September 2023, as autumn painted the Estonian countryside in shades of gold and crimson, Elian discovered something that would change everything he thought he knew about the world. The oak filing cabinet in section M7 had been scheduled for disposal, its drawers stuck with age and disuse, requiring considerable force to open. But as Elian wrestled with the bottom drawer, his persistence was rewarded when it finally yielded with a groan of protest. Inside, wedged behind a collection of 19th century land surveys, his fingers found something unexpected. A piece of parchment, carefully wrapped in oiled cloth. The material felt different under his touch, heavier than typical period paper, with a texture that suggested significant age. As he carefully unwrapped it, Elian's breath caught in his throat. Before him lay a map unlike anything he had encountered in 2 decades of historical research. The parchment was dated 1769, written in elegant script across the top, in what appeared to be a mixture of Latin and Cyrillic characters. But it was the content that made his pulse quicken. The map depicted a vast empire stretching from the frozen reaches of Siberia, across the Ural Mountains, through Eastern Europe, and remarkably extending tendrils of influence into what appeared to be parts of North America. At the centre of this enormous territory, in bold lettering that seemed to shimmer with gold leaf, were the words, "The Unified Technocratic Dynasty of Grand Tartaria." Elian had heard whispers of Tartaria in fringe historical circles, dismissed by mainstream academia as a misunderstanding of medieval references to various nomadic peoples. But this map suggested something far more substantial. The level of detail was extraordinary, showing not just political boundaries but infrastructure that seemed impossibly advanced for the 18th century. Intricate networks of canals connected major cities, while star-shaped fortifications dotted the landscape in perfectly geometric patterns. Strangest of all were the thin lines connecting these forts, labelled in the margin as energy conduits. The cartographer's signature was clearly visible in the bottom right corner, Aurelio van Kempt, Master Surveyor to His Imperial Majesty. Below the name was an elaborate seal featuring a double-headed eagle crowned with what appeared to be a stylized representation of the Aurora Borealis. Elian's hands trembled slightly as he photographed every inch of the map with his high-resolution camera. This was either an elaborate hoax or evidence of a civilization that had been completely erased from historical record. The implications were staggering. Dr. Marrick. The voice startled him from his examination. Nadezhda Van, the archive's chief librarian, stood in the doorway. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that held depths of knowledge accumulated over decades of managing Estonia's historical treasures. Nadezhda, perfect timing. I need to ask you about something extraordinary I've just found. Elion carefully indicated the map without touching it directly. The older woman approached cautiously, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she examined the parchment. Her face paled noticeably as she read the title. "Where did you find this?" she asked quietly, glancing around as if ensuring they were alone. "Bottom drawer of the cabinet in M7. It was wrapped and hidden behind other documents." Elion studied her reaction. "Nadezhda, do you know something about this?" She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers nervously adjusting her glasses. "Dr. Marrick, in 37 years of managing these archives, I have seen 3 similar documents. All of them disappeared within weeks of their discovery." Disappeared? How does a historical document just disappear from a university archive? The same way that researchers who ask too many questions about certain topics suddenly find their funding cut or their access revoked. She moved closer, lowering her voice. "There are subjects that some very powerful people prefer remain buried. The topic of Tartaria is one of them." Elion felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. "Are you suggesting there's an active effort to suppress information about this civilization?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what I've observed." Nadezhda's eyes held a warning. "Dr. Penchev from Sofia University found a similar map in 2018. Within a month, his research was discredited, his university position terminated, and he suffered what his doctors called a complete nervous breakdown." Professor Martinez from Barcelona discovered references to Tartarian trade routes in 2020. Her laptop was stolen, her notes disappeared, and she received a generous offer to research medieval pottery instead. The weight of her words settled over Elion like a shroud. "What are you saying I should do?" "I'm saying you should be very careful about who you share this with. And I'm saying that if you're determined to investigate further, you should work quickly and quietly." She paused, studying his face. "But knowing you as I do, Doctor Marrick, I suspect nothing I say will deter you from pursuing this." She was right. The map had ignited something in Elion that years of conventional research had never achieved. Here was a mystery that could rewrite history, and despite the warnings, he knew he had no choice but to follow where it led. "There's something else," Nadezhda said, reaching into her jacket pocket. She produced a small, worn business card. "If you're going to do this, you'll need help. Contact this person. Tell her I sent you, and mention the Aurora Protocol." Elion examined the card. It bore only a name, Dr. Inez Calloway, and a phone number with a European prefix. Who is she? Someone who asks the same questions you're about to start asking. Someone who understands that history is written by the victors, and that the victors often have very good reasons for ensuring certain stories are never told. As Nadezhda left him alone with the map, Elion felt the familiar thrill of standing at the edge of a great discovery. But beneath that excitement ran an undercurrent of apprehension. He was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the past, and based on Nadezhda's warnings, it was a journey that others had paid dearly for attempting. He carefully photographed the map one more time, securing the images on an encrypted drive. Then, with infinite care, he rewrapped the original and placed it in his briefcase. Whatever forces had worked to suppress knowledge of Tartaria, they were about to face a historian who had built his career on refusing to accept convenient lies. The hunt for the truth about the lost empire was about to begin. 3 days after discovering the map, Elion sat in his cluttered office surrounded by towers of books, printouts and photocopied documents. His initial research had yielded frustratingly little through conventional academic channels. References to Tartaria in mainstream historical texts were sparse and dismissive, typically describing it as a vague term used by medieval Europeans to refer to the vast, unknown regions beyond their borders. But the fringe sources told a different story entirely. Following a promising lead, Elion had tracked down the writings of Marcel Belloin, a Parisian architect whose work had been largely forgotten by mainstream historians. Belloin's journal, dated 1811, contained passages that made Elian's pulse quicken. The excavations beneath the Rue de Rivoli have revealed structures that challenge our understanding of Paris's development. We have found foundations of buildings that appear to predate known construction by centuries, yet their engineering surpasses our current capabilities. The metalwork shows evidence of techniques unknown to our modern smiths, and the stone construction displays our understanding of architectural principles that we are only beginning to rediscover. More intriguing still was Belloin's description of what he called the underground cities. It is as if entire urban centres lie buried beneath our modern Paris. The chambers we have uncovered show evidence of sophisticated power systems, with copper conduits running through the walls in patterns that suggest some form of energy distribution. Most remarkable are the domed structures, built from a single piece of stone so large and perfectly shaped that our contemporary methods could not duplicate the feat. Elian's search for more information about Belloin led him to a collection of photographs archived at the Bibliothèque Nationale. The images, dating from the late 1800s, showed excavation sites across Europe and even North America, where multi-storey buildings emerge from beneath meters of accumulated earth and debris. The photographs from St. Petersburg were particularly striking. They showed ornate Baroque facades partially buried in earth, with only the top floors visible above ground level. According to the accompanying documentation, city officials had dismissed this as the result of natural sedimentation over centuries. But Elian's trained eye noticed details that contradicted this explanation. The buildings showed no signs of gradual burial. Instead, they appeared to have been suddenly and uniformly covered, as if by a massive instantaneous event. Similar images from San Francisco told the same story. Photographs from the 1870s showed crews excavating what appeared to be grand municipal buildings from beneath layers of mud and debris. The official records described these as flood damage from the winter of 1861 to 62, but the scale and uniformity of the burial suggested something far more significant. As Elian compiled these images and accounts, a pattern began to emerge. Across different continents and cultures, the period between 1812 and 1816 had been marked by unusual weather, crop failures, and what historical records described as years of extraordinary atmospheric disturbance. The official explanation pointed to the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815, but Elian began to suspect this was only part of a much larger story. The theory that began to crystallise was both elegant and terrifying in its implications. What if the early 19th century had witnessed not just a volcanic winter, but a global catastrophe that had literally buried an advanced civilization? What if the political upheavals of that era, the reshaping of Europe after Napoleon, the redrawing of territorial boundaries, the establishment of new governmental systems, had been not causes but effects of a much more fundamental transformation? The more Elian researched, the more evidence he found for what he began to think of as the Great Erasure. Maps from the early 1800s showed cities and regions that simply vanished from later cartographic records. Trade routes that had been established for centuries were suddenly abandoned. Technologies that had been documented in earlier periods were forgotten or dismissed as impossible. Most intriguing of all were the accounts of what contemporary sources described as mud floods. These weren't typical flooding events caused by rivers overflowing their banks. Instead, witnesses described sudden inundations of thick, viscous mud that appeared to come from the earth itself. The substance was unlike anything in their experience, neither fully liquid nor solid, but something that flowed like water yet hardened like cement once it settled. A Russian engineer named Pavel Volkonsky had documented one such event near Moscow in 1816. The earth seemed to convulse, and then the mud came. Not from any river or lake that we could identify, but as if the very ground was liquefying and rising up. It moved with purpose, flowing around some structures while completely engulfing others. When it finally settled, entire districts had vanished beneath a uniform layer of this strange substance. Most peculiar was how it seemed to target the oldest and most sophisticated buildings while leaving simpler, newer constructions relatively untouched. Elian found similar accounts from across Europe and even North America. The pattern was consistent. Advanced buildings and infrastructure were buried beneath layers of this mysterious mud, while newer, simpler structures were spared. It was as if the very earth was selectively erasing evidence of a more sophisticated civilization. But the most chilling discovery came in the form of government communications from the period immediately following these events. Documents from various European chancelleries showed a coordinated effort to rewrite history, to establish new narratives that explain the changed landscape without reference to the buried civilization. A dispatch from the Austrian Foreign Ministry, dated 1819, was particularly revealing. The successful implementation of the territorial rationalisation programme has exceeded expectations. The cartographic revision process has eliminated problematic historical references while establishing clear governmental authority over previously disputed regions. The burial events, while unfortunate, have provided an opportunity to establish more rational and modern administrative structures without the complications of pre-existing claims and traditions. The language was bureaucratic, but the implications were staggering. Government officials were describing the systematic erasure of historical evidence as a successful policy outcome. They were treating the burial of an entire civilization as an opportunity for political reorganisation. As Elian pieced together this hidden history, he began to understand why Nadezhda had warned him to be careful. He wasn't just uncovering academic curiosities or historical footnotes. He was documenting evidence of what appeared to be the most successful cover-up in human history: the deliberate erasure of an advanced civilization and the establishment of a new world order built on lies about the past. The question that haunted him as he compiled his research was simple yet profound. If such a civilization had existed, and if it had been deliberately erased from history, who had possessed the power and motivation to orchestrate such a massive deception? And more importantly, were those same forces still active today? Elian's investigation took an unexpected turn when he began researching the great world's fairs of the late 19th century. What had started as a tangential inquiry into the architectural capabilities of the Tartarian civilization led him to discover what he began to suspect was the most audacious act of historical deception ever attempted. The breakthrough came when he found a cache of documents in the Budapest State Archives, misfiled under municipal construction projects miscellaneous. The papers, dating from 1878, were internal memos between organisers of the Exposition Universelle in Paris. What made them extraordinary was not their official content, but the handwritten marginalia that revealed a very different story about the grand exhibitions that had captivated the world. One memo, signed by Exposition Director Henri Fournier, contained a notation that made Elian's blood run cold. The architectural assessment team confirms that structure block C7 predates our official timeline by at least 2 centuries. The construction techniques and materials are consistent with other recovered specimens. Recommend classification under Protocol 7. Public designation as period reproduction, pending final disposition. Protocol 7. The phrase appeared repeatedly throughout the documents, always in reference to buildings that seemed to pose some kind of classificatory problem. As Elian traced these references, a disturbing pattern emerged. Many of the most magnificent structures at the world's fairs, the soaring palaces, the impossibly grand pavilions, the architectural marvels that visitors assumed had been constructed specifically for the exhibitions, had actually been pre-existing buildings, remnants of the buried Tartarian civilization. The evidence was overwhelming once he knew what to look for. Construction timelines that made no sense for the scale of the buildings. Architectural techniques that supposedly didn't exist until decades later. Most tellingly, photographs from the construction phase showed workers not building the structures, but excavating them from beneath layers of accumulated earth and debris. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago provided even more damning evidence. Elian obtained copies of private correspondence between exposition organisers and a mysterious entity referred to only as the Commission. The letters, written in careful diplomatic language, revealed a systematic effort to repurpose discovered Tartarian architecture for the fair, while maintaining strict secrecy about the building's true origins. Daniel Burnham, the exposition's chief architect, had written to Commission Representative Marcus Whitmore. The structures in Grid Section 12 have been successfully integrated into the exposition design. Public documentation will reflect our architectural team's vision, as per established protocols. The advanced engineering principles observed in the original construction have been attributed to innovative American ingenuity. Several technical features have been deemed too sophisticated for public display and have been modified or concealed accordingly. But the most shocking discovery came in the form of a blueprint marked TRS Protocol Total Reimaging System, dated 1902 and bearing the insignia of what appeared to be a secret council operating under the auspices of the League of Nations. The document outlined a comprehensive program for managing architectural anomalies at international exhibitions. The TRS protocol was chillingly systematic. It provided detailed procedures for identifying and securing structures that predated official historical timelines, developing cover stories that attributed advanced engineering to contemporary innovation, managing information flow to prevent public recognition of technological inconsistencies, coordinating with media outlets to ensure appropriate narrative framing, planning for the systematic demolition of problematic structures following exhibitions. The protocol's introduction stated its purpose with bureaucratic clarity. The maintenance of historical coherence requires careful management of architectural evidence that might suggest technological capabilities inconsistent with established developmental timelines. The temporary nature of international exhibitions provides an ideal framework for public display of recovered structures, while maintaining narrative control through planned obsolescence. Elian realised he was looking at evidence of a decades-long campaign to display the remnants of Tartarian civilization to the public, while simultaneously concealing their true significance. The world's fairs had been elaborate exercises in hiding truth in plain sight, allowing people to marvel at impossible architecture while being told it represented the height of contemporary achievement. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. Fair after fair had featured buildings whose construction was supposedly cutting edge, yet which displayed engineering principles and artistic sophistication that wouldn't be officially discovered for decades. The public had been invited to celebrate human progress, while unknowingly viewing the remnants of a civilization that had been systematically erased from their history. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from a series of letters between commission agents and various government officials. The correspondence revealed that the demolition of these magnificent structures at the end of each fair wasn't just part of the normal clean-up process. It was a deliberate destruction of evidence. A telegram from Commission Director Jonathan Aldrich to Chicago Mayor Carter Harrison Sr., dated November 1893, was particularly chilling. Demolition of sections 7 through 12 must proceed according to accelerated timeline. Recent public inquiries regarding construction techniques require immediate evidence elimination. Standard fire protocols authorized if mechanical demolition proves insufficient. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871, Elian realized with growing horror, might not have been the accident historians had assumed. Coming just 2 years before the exposition, it had conveniently cleared vast areas of the city where Tartarian ruins might have been uncovered during normal urban development. The timing was too perfect, the scope too comprehensive to be mere coincidence. As Elian delved deeper into the archives, he found evidence that similar accidents had struck other cities where World's Fairs were planned. The Great Boston Fire of 1872, the Great Seattle Fire of 1889, the catastrophic fires that had swept through dozens of American cities in the late 19th century, all had occurred in areas where subsequent excavations for exposition construction had revealed impossible architecture. The pattern was clear. Discover Tartarian ruins, display them as contemporary marvels, then destroy the evidence and blame natural disasters for any inconvenient questions. It was a strategy that had been repeated across continents and decades, orchestrated by an organisation with the resources and influence to manipulate governments, media, and public perception on a global scale. But who was the Commission, and how had they managed to maintain such control over historical narrative for more than a century? The answer to that question would prove to be even more disturbing than the evidence of the cover-up itself. Dr. Elian Marrick's research took a decidedly more technical turn when he began investigating the mysterious energy conduits marked on the original Tartarian map. What he discovered challenged not only historical understanding but fundamental assumptions about technological development and the capabilities of pre-industrial civilizations. The breakthrough came through an unlikely source: Dr. Lev Oronov, a Russian electrical engineer whose posthumously published papers had been largely ignored by the academic community. Oronov had died in 1987, but his research notes, preserved in the archives of the Moscow Institute of Technology, contained observations that suddenly made perfect sense in the context of Elian's investigation. Oronov had spent the later years of his career studying what he called architectural anomalies in Russian Orthodox cathedrals and municipal buildings constructed before 1850. His notes described structural elements that seemed to have no purely architectural function, but showed characteristics consistent with advanced electrical engineering. The spires and towers of these structures, Oronov had written, show evidence of purposeful metal integration that cannot be explained by purely aesthetic or structural considerations. Copper and iron components are woven through the stonework in patterns that suggest deliberate electromagnetic design. Most significantly, many of these buildings show evidence of having been constructed around pre-existing metallic frameworks of extraordinary sophistication. Intrigued by these observations, Elian began examining photographs and architectural plans of buildings that had been constructed on sites where Tartarian ruins had been discovered. The pattern Oronov had identified became clear. These structures weren't just built on top of Tartarian foundations, they had been built around and incorporated Tartarian technology that the builders didn't fully understand. The star forts that appeared on the original map provided the most compelling evidence. These geometric structures, found across continents in locations that official history claimed had never been in contact with each other, all shared identical design principles. They were positioned at precise intervals that corresponded to what geologists called telluric currents, naturally occurring electrical phenomena that flowed through the Earth's crust. But more than just positioning, the forts themselves appeared to have been designed to interact with these currents. Ground-penetrating radar surveys, conducted by various geological teams over the years, had revealed that the star forts contained complex underground networks of metal conduits, crystalline chambers, and what appeared to be sophisticated resonance devices. Dr. Sarah Blackwood, a geophysicist at Cambridge, had published a paper in 2019 describing electromagnetic anomalies at star fort sites across Europe. Her findings, though published in a respected journal, had attracted little attention from the broader academic community. But reading her work in the context of Tartarian research, Elian realised she had documented evidence of a continent-spanning energy grid. The electromagnetic signatures at these sites, Blackwood had written, suggest the presence of artificial structures designed to harness and redirect naturally occurring electrical phenomena. The sophistication of the apparent design exceeds anything in contemporary technology. If these structures are indeed human-made, they represent an understanding of electromagnetic principles that we are only beginning to develop. Elian contacted Dr. Blackwood, carefully introducing himself and his research without revealing the full scope of his investigation. Her response was immediate and intriguing. "Dr. Marrick, I've been hoping someone would ask these questions. The electromagnetic patterns I've been documenting suggest a coordinated system of unprecedented scope and sophistication. But every time I've tried to publish more detailed findings, I've encountered unusual resistance from both funding agencies and peer reviewers. There are clearly aspects of this phenomenon that some people prefer remain unstudied." Through Blackwood's contacts, Elian gained access to electromagnetic surveys from star fort sites across 3 continents. The data was remarkable. Each fort showed evidence of structures designed to collect, concentrate and transmit electrical energy across vast distances. The network appeared to have been capable of wireless power transmission on a scale that modern technology was only beginning to approach. But the most extraordinary discovery came when Elian managed to examine one of Oronov's resonator devices in person. The Russian engineer had reportedly recovered several of these artifacts from decommissioned Orthodox cathedrals before his death. One device had ended up in the collection of the Hermitage Museum, catalogued simply as decorative metalwork, origin unknown, approximately 18th century. The object was unlike anything Elian had ever seen. About the size of a large book, it appeared to be made from a single piece of metal that showed no evidence of welding, casting, or any other manufacturing process. The surface was covered with intricate geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow as he examined them from different angles. Most remarkably, the metal itself seemed to contain multiple elements, in combinations that contemporary metallurgy couldn't reproduce. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a material scientist at Tokyo University, who agreed to examine photographs and spectroscopic data from the device, was blunt in his assessment. The alloy composition you've documented is impossible, according to our current understanding of metallurgy. The elements appear to be bonded at a molecular level, in ways that our technology cannot achieve. The geometric patterns show evidence of precision manufacturing beyond our current capabilities. This object, if authentic, represents technology that we don't yet understand. But the device's most extraordinary property became apparent when Elion was allowed to observe it during a thunderstorm. As lightning flashed outside the museum, the geometric patterns on the device began to glow with a soft, pulsing light. The effect lasted for several minutes after the storm passed, suggesting the object was somehow storing and releasing electromagnetic energy. This led Elian to a stunning realization. The Tartarian civilization hadn't just been advanced in conventional terms. They had developed technology that worked in harmony with natural electromagnetic phenomena, creating a power grid that used the Earth itself as a conductor. The star forts weren't just military installations or administrative centres. They were nodes in a global energy network that had provided power to an entire civilization without the need for fuel, combustion, or the environmental destruction that characterized modern energy production. The implications were staggering. If such technology had existed and been deliberately suppressed, it represented not just historical fraud, but active sabotage of human technological development. Someone had chosen to bury free, clean energy technology in favour of systems that required centralised control and environmental exploitation. As Elian compiled his evidence, he began to understand why the Tartarian civilization had been so thoroughly erased from history. It wasn't just about political control or territorial claims. It was about maintaining a technological paradigm that ensured the dependence of populations on centralised authority. The Tartarian energy grid had represented something far more dangerous to establish power structures than advanced architecture or sophisticated governance. It had represented technological independence. The question that haunted Elian was whether any of this technology had survived the systematic destruction. If even fragments of the Tartarian energy system remained hidden or forgotten, they could revolutionise human civilization, but they could also represent an existential threat to every industry, government and power structure that depended on humanity's continued dependence on centralised controllable energy sources. The breakthrough that would either vindicate Elian's research or seal his fate came through an encrypted message from Dr. Inez Calloway, the mysterious contact Nadezhda had provided. After weeks of careful correspondence, building trust through the exchange of increasingly sensitive information, Calloway finally revealed why she had agreed to help him. "I've been tracking the suppression of Tartarian evidence for 15 years, she wrote. My father was one of the researchers who disappeared in the 1980s after getting too close to the truth. But I have something that even the Commission doesn't know about: direct access to what might be the last intact Tartarian archive. The archive, according to Calloway, was hidden in a sealed underground chamber beneath the Ural Mountains, designated ARKVY in declassified Soviet documents. During the 1960s, Soviet mining operations had accidentally breached the chamber while excavating for a military installation. The discovery had been immediately classified at the highest levels, with all evidence of the find buried in bureaucratic secrecy. But Calloway's father, Dr. James Calloway, had been part of the original investigative team. Before his disappearance, he had managed to document the chamber's location and create detailed maps of its contents. Those maps had been Inez's inheritance and her obsession for the past decade and a half. "The chamber contains materials that prove everything you've been investigating," her message continued. "But more than that, it contains evidence of what really happened to the Tartarian civilization, and who was responsible for its destruction. If you're serious about exposing this conspiracy, Archivo Ice is where we'll find the proof that even they can't deny or suppress." The journey to the Ural Mountains required careful planning and considerable risk. Calloway had connections within the Russian Ministry of Cultural Affairs who could provide legitimate research credentials, but accessing the site would require them to pose as geologists investigating mineral deposits. The slightest suspicion would result in immediate arrest and detention, with no guarantee that either of them would ever be seen again. Elian knew he was crossing a line from which there would be no return. But the evidence he had compiled over the past months painted a picture so significant and so thoroughly suppressed that he felt morally obligated to pursue the truth regardless of personal risk. The chamber itself was accessible through a maintenance tunnel in the abandoned Seveny mining complex, about 200 kilometres northeast of Yekaterinburg. Calloway's contact, a regional mining supervisor named Viktor Petrov, agreed to provide access in exchange for a substantial bribe and absolute assurance that his involvement would never be revealed. The descent into Arc 6 took place on a frigid November night, with temperatures dropping well below freezing and a brutal wind howling across the Ural peaks. Elian and Calloway, equipped with professional geological equipment to maintain their cover story, followed Petrov through a maze of abandoned tunnels that seemed to burrow endlessly into the mountain's heart. The chamber, when they finally reached it, was unlike anything Elian had imagined. The space was vast, easily the size of a cathedral, carved from living rock with a precision that suggested advanced tools and engineering knowledge. But it was the contents that took his breath away. The walls were lined with metal shelving that held thousands of books, scrolls, maps and documents, all preserved in the mountain's stable, cool environment. "My God," Calloway whispered, her voice echoing in the enormous space. "It's all still here." The materials they examined over the next several hours painted a picture of the Tartarian civilization that exceeded even Elian's most optimistic theories. The preserved manuscripts described a global society based on principles of technological harmony with natural systems, sustainable resource management, and decentralized governance that eliminated the need for oppressive central authority. One volume, bound in a material that felt like leather but showed no signs of age despite apparent centuries of existence, contained detailed schematics for the energy grid system. The technology was elegant in its simplicity, yet sophisticated beyond contemporary understanding. The Tartarians had developed methods for tapping into the Earth's natural electromagnetic field, storing that energy in crystalline matrices, and distributing it through networks of conducting materials embedded in architectural structures. But it was another volume that revealed the true scope of the historical conspiracy they had uncovered. Written in multiple languages and clearly intended as a comprehensive record, it documented the systematic destruction of Tartarian civilization by what the authors called the Coalition of Shadows. The Coalition, according to these documents, had been a secret alliance of European royal houses, emerging industrial interests, and religious authorities who had recognised that Tartarian technology and social organisation represented an existential threat to their power structures. The decentralised energy grid made populations independent of centralised control. The sustainable resource management eliminated scarcity-based economic manipulation. The distributed governance model made traditional monarchical and religious authority irrelevant. The solution, as documented in chilling detail, had been systematic genocide followed by historical erasure. The mud floods that Elian had researched weren't natural disasters but deliberate attacks using weaponized geological manipulation. The Coalition had developed methods for triggering localized liquefaction events that could bury entire cities while leaving surrounding areas untouched. The technology was crude compared to Tartarian engineering, but effective for its intended purpose of destruction. The final entry in the record, dated according to the Tartarian calendar as year 7412, approximately 1816 in the Gregorian system, was written in a shaking hand that suggested its author was among the last survivors. The coalition's final assault has succeeded where years of conventional warfare failed. Our cities lie buried, our people scattered or murdered, our knowledge suppressed. But the earth remembers what they have destroyed, and the stars still sing the frequencies of our power grid. We did not vanish, we were buried. But the earth remembers, and someday someone will listen to what it has to tell them. As Elian photographed page after page of evidence, he realized he was documenting not just historical fraud, but active crimes against humanity that had continued for centuries. The suppression of Tartarian technology had condemned humanity to environmental destruction, economic manipulation, and political oppression that could have been avoided. But as they prepared to leave the chamber, Calloway noticed something that chilled them both. Fresh footprints in the dust near the entrance, prints that hadn't been there when they arrived. "We need to leave," she said quietly. "Now." As they gathered their equipment and documentation, Elian took one last look around the chamber that contained proof of humanity's hidden heritage. Whatever happened next, the truth was finally emerging from centuries of suppression. But as they made their way back through the tunnels toward the surface, both researchers realized that exposing this conspiracy would require more than academic publications or scholarly presentations. They were challenging forces that had successfully hidden the truth for 2 centuries and had eliminated anyone who posed a threat to their control. The race between revelation and suppression was about to begin. The systematic destruction of Dr. Elian Marrick's research began within 48 hours of his return from the Ural Mountains. His university access was revoked due to budget restructuring. His research files were corrupted by what IT specialists described as unprecedented system failures. The photographs and documentation from ARKV-OR, despite being stored on multiple encrypted drives, were somehow corrupted or entirely deleted. By the end of the week, Interpol had issued a warrant for Marrick's arrest on charges of illegal border crossing and theft of Russian cultural artifacts. The man who had spent months meticulously documenting the greatest cover-up in human history had become a fugitive from the very forces he had sought to expose. Dr. Inez Calloway managed to evade the initial dragnet, but her communications with Elian were being monitored. Their last encrypted conversation was brief and desperate. "They're moving faster than we anticipated," she wrote. "The Commission has resources we underestimated, but I've managed to upload fragments of our documentation to distributed servers. Even if they silence us, pieces of the truth will survive." Elian's final message was characteristically defiant. "The evidence is undeniable. Tartaria existed. They destroyed it. They've hidden the truth for 2 centuries, but you can't bury reality forever. Someone will connect the dots." 3 days later, Dr. Elian Marrick disappeared. The official story, released simultaneously by Estonian authorities and international law enforcement, was that he had suffered a complete psychological breakdown following academic fraud allegations and had fled to avoid prosecution. His research was described as elaborate fantasy created by a brilliant but disturbed mind-seeking attention through increasingly outlandish claims. Nadezhda Devan found her archive access revoked and her pension suspended pending investigation of security breaches. Viktor Petrov, the mining supervisor who had provided access to ARKVI, died in what authorities described as an industrial accident at a construction site 400 kilometres from the Ural Mountains. But Inez Calloway had been true to her word. In the weeks following Elian's disappearance, fragments of their research began appearing on obscure forums, alternative history websites, and conspiracy theory channels. The information was scattered, incomplete, and mixed with enough disinformation to make verification difficult. But for those who knew what to look for, the truth was there. 6 months after Elian's disappearance, a video appeared on a small YouTube channel called Hidden Frequencies. The upload lasted exactly 1 hour before being removed for violation of community guidelines. But in that hour, tens of thousands of viewers watched grainy footage of the ARKVI chamber, saw photographs of impossible architecture from the world's fairs, and heard a distorted voice reading passages from Tartarian manuscripts. The voice was unmistakably Elian Marrick's, though electronically altered to mask its source. They want you to believe that human civilization developed slowly, painfully, through centuries of gradual progress. They want you to accept that environmental destruction, economic inequality, and technological dependence are inevitable prices of advancement. But that's a lie designed to keep you from asking the most dangerous question of all. What if there was another way? The video continued with systematic presentation of evidence that the mainstream academic world had dismissed or ignored. Star forts aligned with electromagnetic grid patterns. World's Fair buildings that couldn't have been constructed with period technology. Government documents describing the systematic suppression of historical evidence. And finally, footage from AR cave viewers showing shelves of preserved manuscripts that proved an advanced civilization had been deliberately erased from human memory. You're not supposed to ask about Tartaria, the distorted voice concluded, but the ruins are still standing, hidden in plain sight. The energy grid still pulses beneath our feet, waiting for someone to remember how to listen. They buried our past, but they couldn't kill the truth. Just look up at the impossible architecture they claim was built by primitive peoples. Then look deeper and ask yourself why they're so desperate to keep you from remembering what we once were. The video's final frame showed coordinates for locations around the world where Tartarian structures could still be found by those willing to look beyond official explanations. Within minutes of the video's removal, mirrors began appearing on alternative platforms. The coordinates led investigators to sites in Russia, China, Europe, and North America, where unexplained architecture displayed the characteristic signs of Tartarian engineering. Ground-penetrating radar revealed the telltale signatures of buried buildings and technological infrastructure. A grassroots movement began to emerge. Independent researchers, amateur archaeologists, and curious citizens started documenting anomalies in their local areas. They found star forts that appeared on no official maps. They discovered buildings whose construction techniques exceeded the supposed capabilities of their historical periods. They identified electromagnetic anomalies that suggested the remnants of a vast energy grid still lay dormant beneath the Earth. The Commission's response was swift but increasingly ineffective. They could suppress individual researchers and control mainstream academic institutions, but they couldn't stop the distributed investigation that was emerging across the internet. Too many people had seen the evidence. Too many questions were being asked. The carefully maintained narrative of human history was beginning to crack. Dr. Sarah Blackwood, the Cambridge geophysicist who had documented electromagnetic anomalies at starfort sites, received an unexpected research grant from an anonymous foundation. Her new project officially studied geological electrical phenomena, but her real work involved mapping the remnants of the Tartarian energy grid. She found that substantial portions of the network remained intact, buried but functional, waiting for someone to understand how to reactivate it. In Moscow, a programmer named Alexei Volkov claimed to have detected unusual electromagnetic signals emanating from beneath the city. The pattern suggested artificial origins and appeared to be concentrated around sites where historical records indicated Tartarian structures had once stood. When he attempted to publish his findings, his data was confiscated and he was warned to cease his research. But copies of his work had already been distributed to researchers around the world. Similar discoveries were being made on every continent. The evidence was becoming too widespread, too well documented, and too compelling for traditional suppression methods to contain. The truth about Tartaria was emerging not through academic channels or official announcements, but through a distributed network of investigators who refused to accept convenient lies about humanity's past. The final piece of Elane's legacy emerged 1 year after his disappearance. A package arrived at the offices of 17 major news organisations simultaneously, containing comprehensive documentation of the Tartarian conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. Government memos describing historical suppression, photographs of impossible architecture, technical specifications for technologies that officially didn't exist, and testimonies from researchers who had been silenced or eliminated for asking inconvenient questions. Most mainstream outlets buried the story or dismissed it as elaborate hoax. but several independent journalists began investigating the claims, and their findings corroborated the essential elements of Elian's research. The systematic suppression of Tartarian history was real. Advanced technology had been deliberately hidden from humanity. A shadow organisation had spent centuries controlling human development by concealing evidence of what civilization could achieve. As this final transmission reaches you, the truth about Tartaria is spreading faster than the forces of suppression can contain it. Every star fort that gets properly investigated, every World's Fair photograph that gets examined with informed eyes, every electromagnetic anomaly that gets mapped and documented adds another piece to the puzzle that Elian Marrick died trying to complete. The forgotten cartographer may have disappeared, but his map to humanity's hidden heritage remains. The question now is not whether the truth about Tartaria will emerge, but whether we have the courage to reclaim the technological and social possibilities that were stolen from us 2 centuries ago. The ruins are still standing. The energy grid still pulses beneath our feet. The knowledge still waits in hidden archives for those brave enough to seek it. And somewhere, perhaps, Dr. Elian Marrick continues his work, mapping the coordinates of humanity's forgotten future. The Earth remembers. The question is, are you ready to listen? Hello there, fellow seekers of the strange and unexplained. Before we dive into tonight's tale, I'm curious about you, our listeners scattered across this vast world of ours. How has your day been treating you? What time is it where you are right now? Are you listening from a bustling city, a quiet suburban home, or perhaps somewhere more remote? I love knowing that our community spans continents and time zones, united by our fascination with the mysteries that lurk just beneath the surface of our everyday reality. Speaking of mysteries, if you're enjoying these deep dives into the unknown, please consider subscribing to Sleep Theories. Your support helps us continue exploring the darkest corners of conspiracy, the paranormal, and those unsettling questions that keep us awake at night. Now, settle in as we explore a story that will make you question the very nature of memory, reality, and truth itself. Dr. Cassia Moreno had always prided herself on her ability to find patterns where others saw only chaos. It was this talent that had earned her a PhD in cognitive neuroscience from Stanford, a prestigious research position studying memory formation, and eventually a lucrative contract with the Department of Defense. But as she sat in her sterile government office in Arlington, Virginia, staring at the data scrolling across her monitor, she wished for once that her pattern recognition skills would fail her. The contract had seemed straightforward enough when she'd signed on 6 months ago. The Pentagon wanted her to analyse psychological anomalies appearing in national security background screenings. Nothing too unusual there. The military had always been paranoid about mental fitness. What they hadn't told her was just how widespread these anomalies had become. Cassia rubbed her tired eyes and took another sip of her cold coffee. It was well past midnight, but she couldn't tear herself away from the data. The numbers were staggering. In the past 18 months, over 3,000 federal employees, military personnel and contractors had failed routine psychological evaluations, not because of mental illness or instability, but because they had given consistently wrong answers to what should have been simple questions about commonly known facts. She pulled up the first case file. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, Army Intelligence, 15-year veteran with an exemplary record, applying for a higher security clearance. During his evaluation, he had insisted that the popular children's book series was called The Berenstein Bears, not Berenstain Bears. When shown the actual books with the correct spelling, he became agitated, claiming someone had changed them. The second file, Air Traffic Controller Janet Morrison, FAA. 23 years of flawless service. During her routine psychological assessment, she maintained that Nelson Mandela had died in prison in the 1980s, not in 2013 as former president. She provided specific details about watching his funeral on television, details that matched no historical record. The third, FBI Agent David Chen, Counterintelligence Division. He argued vehemently that there were 52 United States, not 50. When pressed, he couldn't name the additional 2 states but remained absolutely certain of the number. File after file revealed the same disturbing pattern. Highly trained, mentally stable individuals with impeccable records were suddenly remembering a different version of reality. What made Cassia's skin crawl wasn't the wrong answers themselves. False memories were well documented in psychological literature. What terrified her was the consistency. The same wrong answers, given by completely unrelated people across the country. People who had never met, never communicated, yet shared identical false memories, down to the smallest details. It defied everything she knew about how memory worked. Cassia opened a new document and began typing her preliminary report, but paused when she noticed something else in the files. A single phrase kept appearing in the margins of the evaluation reports, always handwritten by different assessors. Project Manifold, Level E access only. She tried searching the Pentagon's database for any reference to Project Manifold. Access denied. She tried the Defense Intelligence Agency. Access denied. Every search led to the same digital wall, the same terse message. Insufficient clearance level. Cassia leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. In her 3 decades of scientific research, she had learned to trust her instincts. And right now, every instinct was screaming that she had stumbled onto something much larger and more dangerous than a simple psychological study. She picked up her secure phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in over 5 years. "Haruto, it's Cassia Moreno. I know it's late, but I need to talk to you about something. Something involving CERN and quantum mechanics." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Cassia, Dr. Haruto Seldine's voice was barely above a whisper. Are you calling from a secure line? Of course, Pentagon issued. Why? Another pause. Because if you're calling me about what I think you're calling about, then they're already watching you. The coffee shop in Georgetown was crowded enough to provide cover, but not so packed that their conversation would be drowned out. Cassia had chosen a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances, a habit she'd developed during her early consulting work with the CIA. Dr. Haruto Seldin arrived precisely on time, looking older than his 63 years, his once black hair now silver, his dark eyes carrying the weight of secrets. You look like hell, Haruto, Cassia said as he sat down across from her. So do you, but then most people do once they start seeing the cracks. He ordered black coffee from the approaching waitress and waited until she was out of earshot before continuing. Tell me what you found. Cassia slid a tablet across the table, showing him her compiled data on the psychological anomalies. Haruto's expression grew darker with each page he scrolled through. The Mandela effect, he said finally. That's what they're calling it now, isn't it? Named after that woman, Fiona Broome, who first documented the phenomenon online. You know about this? Know about it? Haruto laughed bitterly. Cassia, I helped create it. The words hit her like a physical blow. What are you talking about? Haruto glanced around the coffee shop nervously before leaning forward. 2012. You remember I left CERN abruptly, told everyone I was burned out, wanted to return to private research. Yes, you never explained why. I couldn't. I'd signed NDAs that would have landed me in federal prison for the rest of my life. But things have changed. The project is supposed to be shut down, and frankly, I'm tired of carrying this alone. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I was recruited for something called the Manifold Initiative. Officially, it was dimensional stability fieldwork. Unofficially, it was the most dangerous experiment in human history. Cassia felt her mouth go dry. Explain. The Large Hadron Collider at CERN, and several smaller facilities like it around the world, don't just smash particles together for research. The energy levels we achieve, the exotic matter we create, it has unintended consequences. We started noticing small discrepancies in our data, tiny variations in physical constants, minute changes in historical records stored in our databases. Changes? At first we thought it was equipment malfunction or data corruption, but then we started comparing notes with other facilities, cross-referencing with historical archives. The discrepancies were real, and they were spreading. Small tears in what we call space-time, micro-fractures that allowed alternate versions of reality to bleed through. Cassia stared at him in disbelief. You're talking about parallel universes. I'm talking about the multiverse, Cassia. The theory that every quantum possibility creates a separate timeline, a separate reality. We discovered that these realities aren't as separate as we thought. Under certain conditions, they can overlap, interfere with each other, and we had inadvertently created those conditions. Haruto reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. The Mandela effects people are experiencing aren't memory glitches, they're timeline fractures. The question isn't why people remember differently, it's why the record changed around them. He opened the folder and slid out 2 documents. Both appeared to be copies of the Declaration of Independence, aged and authentic looking. But there was a crucial difference. This one, Haruto pointed to the first document, refers to the 13 unified colonies. This one mentions the 13 United States. Both are from the National Archives. Both have matching provenance. Both exist simultaneously in our reality. Cassia examined the documents with growing horror. The handwriting was identical. The paper and ink appeared genuine. Even the water stains and age marks matched perfectly. But the words were different. How is this possible? Because we're living in a merged timeline, Cassia. Fragments of different realities bleeding together, creating inconsistencies that our brains struggle to process. Most people's minds simply adjust. accepting the new reality as it overwrites the old. But some people with certain neural patterns, certain types of memory formation, they retain traces of the original timeline. The people in my files? Exactly. They're not mentally ill or delusional. They're remembering correctly. They're just remembering a different version of reality that used to exist. Haruto's voice dropped to barely audible. And that's when the government got involved. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a barren landscape of scrub brush and red rock under the merciless afternoon sun. Cassia checked her GPS again, confirming she was still on course toward the coordinates Haruto had given her. The facility was supposed to be abandoned, shut down after the Manifold initiative was terminated in 2014. But as she crested a low hill, she could see the signs of recent activity. The surface installation looked innocuous enough. A cluster of beige concrete buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Warning signs declared it a restricted government research facility, but they looked weathered and old. What caught Cassia's attention were the tyre tracks in the sand, too fresh to be from the facility's supposed shutdown 8 years ago. She had driven out here on impulse, needing to see the place Haruto had described with her own eyes. He had been reluctant to give her the location, warning her that even though the project was officially terminated, certain elements within the government might still be monitoring the site. But Cassia had pushed, and eventually he had relented. The Ananke ring, he had told her, named after the Greek goddess of necessity and fate. Ironic, considering what we were doing there. Now, standing at the fence in the desert heat, Cassia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She had brought bolt cutters, telling herself she was just going to take a quick look around the perimeter, but as she cut through the chain link, she knew she was crossing a line from which there might be no return. The surface buildings were indeed abandoned, their windows dark and empty. But Haruto had told her the real facility was underground, accessible through a maintenance shaft hidden behind the main building. She found it exactly where he said it would be, a steel hatch nearly invisible among the concrete foundations. The ladder descended farther than she had expected, her flashlight beam disappearing into darkness below. When she finally reached the bottom, she found herself in a corridor carved from solid rock, stretching away into the mountain. Emergency lighting fixtures lined the walls, dark and dead. The air smelled of ozone and something else, something that made her skin crawl with an indefinable wrongness. Following the corridor, she emerged into a vast underground chamber that took her breath away. The Ananke ring stretched before her like the skeleton of some massive prehistoric creature. The particle accelerator tunnel was smaller than the one at CERN, but no less impressive, its superconducting magnets and detection equipment dark and silent. But it was what she found in the control room that made her blood run cold. Banks of servers lined the walls, their status lights blinking softly in the darkness. They hadn't been shut down. They were running on auxiliary power, maintaining something even after all these years. Cassia found a terminal that was still active and began scrolling through the system logs. What she read made her hands shake. Timeline variant 57, Looney Tunes/Toons, probability shift successful. TVO session 12, Mandela test cohort, memory pattern stable. Session abort, Princess Diana lives timeline, cascade effect detected. Reality anchor points, Nelson Mandela death shift, implementation complete. Berenstein-Berenstain variant, low-level reality bleed, monitoring ongoing. Page after page of session logs detailed deliberate attempts to alter reality, to shift timelines and manipulate collective memory. This wasn't accidental bleed-through from parallel universes, it was weaponized reality manipulation. Cassia found a folder labelled Operation Memory Garden and opened it with trembling fingers. The documents inside outlined a collaboration between the Department of Defense, the CIA, and several private defense contractors. The goal was to use quantum resonance frequencies to shift perception, to alter collective memory patterns, and ultimately to rewrite history itself. Some experiments had been small-scale tests, changing minor details like cartoon character names or the spelling of children's books. Others were more ambitious, attempting to erase entire political scandals or alter the outcomes of elections. A few entries made reference to cosmic-level interventions, attempts to change major historical events. The final document in the folder was dated just 6 months ago. It was titled Phase 3 Implementation, Mass Memory Synchronization. The summary made Cassia's stomach turn. Following successful small-scale reality modifications, recommend proceeding to Phase 3, complete timeline consolidation. Using satellite-based quantum resonance arrays, we can achieve global memory synchronization, eliminating dangerous alternate timelines and establishing a single controlled narrative of history. Cassia printed every document she could find, her scientific training warring with her growing terror. She had always believed in the primacy of truth, in the objective reality of facts and evidence. But what she was reading suggested that truth itself could be manipulated, that reality was far more fragile than anyone had imagined. As she prepared to leave, she noticed one final folder labelled the Rememberer's Security Threat Assessment. Inside were photographs and dossiers of people from around the world, civilians, military personnel, scientists, all connected by one common thread. They remembered alternate versions of reality. At the top of the list was her own photograph, with a note written in red ink: Priority target, containment protocol approved. Cassia barely slept for 3 days after her return from Nevada. Every shadow seemed to hide a government agent. Every phone call might be her last. She had uploaded the documents from the Ananke Ring to multiple encrypted cloud servers and sent copies to journalists, scientists, and anyone else she thought might be able to help expose the truth. But so far the response had been minimal. A few conspiracy theory websites had picked up the story, but mainstream media dismissed it as elaborate fiction. That changed when she received a message through her encrypted email account. Dr. Moreno, if you're reading this, then you've seen behind the curtain. You're not alone. There are others who remember, others who know the truth. If you want answers, meet us at the coordinates attached. Come alone and watch for surveillance. The timeline depends on it. MP. The coordinates led her to an abandoned warehouse in Baltimore, a 3-hour drive from her Arlington apartment. Cassia arrived after dark. Her nerves stretched to the breaking point. The warehouse appeared empty, but as she approached the loading dock, a door opened and a shadowy figure beckoned her inside. Dr. Moreno, I'm Marrick Price. The man who greeted her was in his 40s with greying hair and the bearing of a career military officer. Thank you for coming. We've been following your work with great interest. He led her through the dark warehouse to a hidden room behind a false wall. Inside, she found something she hadn't expected. A sophisticated command centre filled with computers, monitors, and communication equipment. More surprising were the dozen people working at various stations, all turning to look at her as she entered. Welcome to the Rememberers, Marrick said. We're what you might call the Resistance. Resistance to what? To having our reality stolen from us. A woman approached from one of the computer terminals. She was young, maybe 30, with the intense eyes of someone who had seen too much. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. Until 2 years ago, I was a quantum physicist at MIT. Then I started remembering things that supposedly never happened. Like what? Like the fact that Australia used to be much farther south. Like the fact that the human heart is located in the centre of the chest, not shifted to the left. Like the fact that there used to be 52 states, not 50. Sarah's voice grew angry. But every time I tried to research these memories, I found that reality had been changed around me. Maps were different, anatomy textbooks had been altered, historical records didn't match what I remembered. Marrick gestured toward a large wall map covered in coloured pins. We've been tracking timeline anomalies for 5 years now. Each pin represents a confirmed reality shift, a place where multiple people remember the same alternate version of history. The pattern is clear. The shifts are accelerating, and they're becoming more invasive. Cassia studied the map, her scientist's mind automatically analysing the data. The clusters follow population centres, but there are outliers. What causes the geographical variations? We think it's related to quantum field fluctuations, said another man, introducing himself as Dr. James Morrison, a former CERN researcher. Areas with high electromagnetic activity, places near particle accelerators or military installations, seem to be more susceptible to timeline bleed. But it's not random, Sarah added. We've identified clear patterns in the types of changes being made. Historical events that made the government look bad are being erased. Scientific discoveries that challenge official narratives are being altered. Even popular culture is being modified to remove subversive messages. Malik pulled up a chair and sat across from Cassia. We know about your discovery at the Ananke Ring. We've been aware of Project Manifold for years, but we could never prove it existed. Your documentation is the first concrete evidence we've seen. How many of you are there? More than you might think, fewer than we need. The problem is identification. Most people don't realise their memories have been altered. The brain is remarkably adaptable. When reality changes around them, they simply accept the new version as correct. Only certain individuals retain traces of the original timeline. What makes them different? Dr. Morrison leaned forward. We're still researching that, but we have some theories. People with certain neurological conditions, individuals who work with quantum physics or advanced mathematics, military personnel exposed to classified electromagnetic experiments, they seem to be more resistant to memory modification. Sarah activated a large monitor showing a timeline chart. What we've discovered is that the reality shifts aren't permanent. They exist in a state of quantum superposition, constantly fighting against each other. The more people who remember the original timeline, the more unstable the altered version becomes. Which is why they're trying to eliminate us, Malik said grimly. Every person who remembers the truth weakens their control over reality. They call us a security threat, but we prefer to think of ourselves as the immune system of the universe. Cassia felt a chill as she realised the implications. The document I found mentioned Phase 3, mass memory synchronization. They're planning something big. We know, Malik nodded. Our intelligence suggests they're preparing to activate a global quantum resonance network. Satellites, ground-based transmitters, maybe even the cell phone infrastructure. If they succeed, they'll be able to rewrite history on a planetary scale. And eliminate anyone who remembers the truth in the process, Sarah added quietly. The room fell silent as the weight of the situation settled over them. They weren't just fighting for their own memories, they were fighting for the very nature of reality itself. So, what do we do? Cassia asked finally. Malik smiled grimly. We remember, we document, and we make sure the truth survives, no matter what version of reality they try to force on us. The changes started small. Cassia first noticed them 3 weeks after her meeting with the Rememberers, subtle alterations to her apartment that made her question her own sanity. The kitchen layout was reversed, with the sink on the right instead of the left. Family photos showed events she didn't remember attending. Her college diploma hung on the wall with a slightly different date. But it was her personal journals that truly terrified her. Cassia had kept detailed research notes for over 20 years, documenting her work in cognitive science with meticulous precision. Now, flipping through the pages, she found entries in her own handwriting describing experiments she had never conducted, conclusions she had never reached, and most disturbing of all, warnings she had never written. Reality is not constant, read one entry dated 6 months earlier. The timeline shifts are accelerating. If you're reading this and don't remember writing it, then you're experiencing temporal displacement. Trust your instincts, not your environment. CM. Another entry, supposedly from just last week. They're coming. The Manifold protocol has been activated. Find the Rememberers. Find the truth. Don't let them erase us all. CM. Cassia's hand shook as she read her own words. Words she had no memory of writing. The implications were staggering. Not only was reality being actively manipulated, but her own timeline was becoming unstable. She was losing pieces of herself to alternate versions that apparently existed simultaneously. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Marrick. Emergency meeting. They've found us. Bring everything. The warehouse in Baltimore was in chaos when Cassia arrived. Equipment was being hastily packed, computers wiped, and documents shredded. Marrick met her at the door, his face grim. We've been compromised. Federal agents raided 3 of our safe houses this morning. They're calling us domestic terrorists, claiming we're spreading dangerous disinformation. He handed her a tablet showing news reports from around the country. But that's not the worst part. The news footage showed government officials holding press conferences, scientists at podiums, all speaking with absolute authority about the dangers of false memory syndrome and the need for cognitive correction therapy for affected individuals. The reports mentioned a new treatment being developed by the Department of Health and Human Services in collaboration with defence contractors, a process that could repair damaged memories and restore normal brain function. They're not just hunting us anymore, Sarah said, approaching with a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. They're preparing to medicalise dissent. Anyone who remembers alternate timelines will be declared mentally ill and subjected to forced treatment. Forced memory modification, Dr. Morrison added. They're turning the weapons they use to alter reality into medical procedures. It's brilliant and terrifying. Cassia felt the walls closing in around them. How long do we have? According to our sources inside the government, the mass synchronization event is scheduled for next week, Marrick replied. Operation Recall Loop. They'll use every available transmission method, satellites, cell towers, even the emergency broadcast system, to send quantum resonance frequencies designed to align all human memory patterns to a single, approved timeline. What timeline? One where Project Manifold never existed, where alternate realities are impossible, where anyone who claims to remember differently is suffering from a treatable mental disorder. Sarah's voice was bitter. They're not just rewriting history, they're rewriting the rules of what's possible. The group worked frantically to salvage what they could from their research, uploading files to decentralized networks, sending copies to contacts around the world, hoping that some record of the truth would survive the coming purge. But as they worked, reality continued to shift around them. Cassia watched in horror as newspaper headlines changed while she was reading them, as photographs flickered between different versions of the same events, as the very text on her computer screen rewrote itself in real time. The timeline was becoming unstable, possibly as a result of their resistance to the official narrative. It's starting, Doctor, Morrison said, pointing to his quantum field detectors. The resonance frequencies are building. They're running preliminary tests. Through the warehouse windows, Cassia could see the night sky flickering strangely, as if reality itself was having trouble maintaining consistency. Stars appeared and disappeared, constellations shifted, and for a brief moment she swore she could see multiple moons in the sky simultaneously. Marrick made a decision. We upload everything. Now full exposure. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence we have. We flood the internet with the truth before they can stop us. It won't matter, Sarah said quietly. Once they activate the global synchronization, none of this will exist. The new timeline won't include any of our discoveries. Then we make sure some of us remember, Cassia said suddenly. If they can modify memory with quantum frequencies, maybe we can shield ourselves from those frequencies. Dr. Morrison looked up from his equipment. Theoretically possible. We'd need to create a localized quantum interference field, something to disrupt their transmission, but the power requirements... The Ananke ring, Cassia interrupted. It's still active, still running on auxiliary power. If we could modify the resonance frequency, use it to broadcast a counter-signal. Marrick stared at her. You want to go back to Nevada? To the heart of their operation? It's the only facility powerful enough to interfere with their satellite network, and it's the last place they'd expect us to make a stand. The decision was made quickly. As reality continued to fracture around them, the surviving rememberers loaded their equipment into vehicles and began the desperate journey across the country. They had perhaps 48 hours before Operation Recall Loop went live. 48 hours to save not just their memories, but the very possibility of alternate truth. As they drove through the night, Cassia watched the world outside change and shift. Roads appeared and disappeared, cities flickered between different versions of themselves, and the stars overhead rearranged themselves into unfamiliar patterns. They were living through the collapse of stable reality, witnessing the birth of a new world where truth would be whatever those in power decided it should be. But they still remembered, and as long as they remembered, there was hope. The final transmission from the Ananke Ring lasted exactly 17 minutes and 33 seconds. Government records claim it was a malfunction in the abandoned facility's power systems, a final surge of electricity through decaying equipment before permanent shutdown. But those who were listening, those who knew what to look for, heard something else entirely. Buried in the static of emergency radio frequencies, encoded in the background hum of satellite communications, scattered across the spectrum of human transmission, was a message. Not words exactly, but something deeper. A quantum signature that resonated with certain types of human consciousness. A signal designed to preserve memory across timeline shifts. The official reports state that Dr. Cassia Marino died in a tragic accident at the facility, along with several other individuals who had apparently broken into the site. Their bodies were found near the particle accelerator, victims of radiation exposure from the aging equipment. The incident was classified under national security protocols, and the site was sealed permanently. Operation Recall Loop launched on schedule, broadcasting synchronized memory patterns to a global audience through every available channel. News reports described it as a successful test of new emergency broadcast capabilities. Most people never noticed the brief static that interrupted their programs, the momentary disorientation as their memories aligned with the approved timeline. The Mandela effect disappeared from public discourse almost overnight. Scientific studies debunk the phenomenon as mass hysteria, combined with normal memory formation errors. Social media posts discussing alternate timelines were flagged as misinformation and removed. Support groups for people experiencing false memories were quietly disbanded, their members enrolled in cognitive therapy programs that proved remarkably effective. But the signal from Ananke Ring had done its work. In hidden corners of the internet, on forums that exist in the spaces between official surveillance, the rememberers still gather. They share fragments of alternate timelines, comparing notes on realities that officially never existed. They document the ongoing shifts, the subtle changes that most people never notice. They remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison. They remember 52 states. They remember when the human heart was centred in the chest and Australia was thousands of miles further south. They remember a world where governments couldn't rewrite the past with quantum frequencies and satellite transmissions. New members join regularly. People who wake up one morning to find their world slightly different than the day before. People who notice that their childhood memories don't match the history books. People who realise that their reality might not be as solid as they thought. The resistance continues as it must. Because as long as someone remembers the truth, any version of truth, the possibility exists for reality to shift again. Memory is the battlefield now, and the war for the nature of existence itself rages on in the spaces between what was, what is, and what might be. Dr. Cassia Moreno's final words, recorded on the equipment found at the Ananke Ring, serve as both warning and rallying cry for those who still remember. If you remember different, you're not broken, you're proof. Proof that reality is not singular, not fixed, not controlled by those who would shape it to their will. Every alternate memory is a crack in their perfect narrative. Every discrepancy is evidence that truth exists beyond their manipulation. Hold on to your memories, compare them with others, document everything. Because the moment we stop remembering, the moment we accept their version as the only version, is the moment we lose ourselves completely. The timestamp on the recording shows an impossible date, a day that never existed in the current timeline. But for those who remember, it serves as proof that Cassia Moreno and the others didn't die in vain. They became part of the signal itself, their consciousness encoded in the static between realities, waiting for the day when the truth can emerge again. In a small apartment in Georgetown, a former CERN physicist named Haruta Seldin sits at his computer, typing carefully chosen words onto forums that exist in the shadows of the internet. His message is simple, but it carries the weight of infinite possibilities. Do you remember when reality was different? Do you remember what they took from us? If you do, then you are not alone. We are the static in their signal, the noise in their perfect symphony. We are the rememberers, and we will not be erased. The war for reality continues, fought in memory and dream, in the spaces between certainty and doubt, and somewhere in the quantum foam that underlies all existence, alternate timelines press against the barriers, waiting for their chance to bleed through once again. Truth, it seems, is more resilient than those who would control it ever imagined. The Manifold archive remains hidden but not destroyed, its secrets scattered like seeds across the infinite landscape of possibility. And every person who reads these words, who remembers things differently than the official record, becomes part of the archive themselves, a living repository of alternate truth in a world that has forgotten the meaning of the word. Remember, document, resist. Hello there, fellow truth seekers and curious minds. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are in this vast world of ours. Thank you for joining us here at Sleep Theories. What time is it where you are? And more importantly, where in this interconnected yet mysterious world are you tuning in from today? But here's what I'm really curious about. What do you think about the conspiracy we're about to explore? Do you believe it's possible that some of our world leaders might not be who they appear to be? Have you ever noticed something just slightly off about a politician's mannerisms or expressions that made you wonder? And speaking of conspiracies that keep you up at night, what theories would you like us to investigate next? Are you drawn to the mysteries of ancient civilizations and their hidden knowledge? The possibility of secret space programs operating beyond public view? The truth behind a missing time phenomena and memory manipulation? Or perhaps something closer to home? The real story behind social media algorithms and their influence on human behaviour? If you find yourself drawn to stories that peel back the layers of reality and question the official narratives we're fed daily, then you've found your home. Don't forget to subscribe to Sleep Theories and let us know in the comments what conspiracy rabbit holes you'd like us to dive down next. Your suggestions help shape our investigations into the shadows that lurk behind our seemingly ordinary world. Now, settle in as we explore a story that might just change how you look at the faces on your television screen forever. The autumn of 2026 brought an unusual chill to Geneva, Switzerland. Freelance photojournalist Wes Rowan had covered enough international summits to know that the real stories rarely happened on stage. They occurred in the spaces between official statements, in the micro-expressions that flashed across faces when leaders thought no one was watching, in the barely perceptible tells that revealed the human beneath the political mask. Wes had built his reputation on capturing these moments. His high-resolution Canon R5 Mark III, equipped with a 400mm telephoto lens, could freeze time at 1/8000th of a second, revealing details that the human eye would miss in real-time motion. This particular assignment for Reuters seemed routine enough. Document the Global Policy Forum's annual gathering, where G20 leaders would discuss climate initiatives and economic cooperation. The Palais des Nations buzzed with the controlled chaos of international diplomacy. Security personnel moved with practiced efficiency, their earpieces crackling with constant updates. Interpreters shuffled between language booths like musical chairs. And in the centre of it all, the world's most powerful people performed their carefully choreographed dance of handshakes, photo opportunities, and measured statements. Wes positioned himself in the designated press area, his camera tracking Chancellor Anneliese Breuer of Germany as she approached the podium for her keynote address on renewable energy partnerships. Breuer had always been one of his favourite subjects to photograph. Her expressions were genuine, unguarded in a way that made for compelling imagery. She possessed an authenticity that seemed increasingly rare among world leaders. As Breuer began speaking about carbon neutrality targets, Wes's finger worked the shutter with rhythmic precision. Click, click, click. Each frame captured at full resolution, preserving every detail of her face, every subtle shift in expression. He particularly focused on her eyes, those clear blue orbs that seemed to convey more sincerity than her words ever could. It was during a pause in her speech as she reached for her water glass that Wes noticed something peculiar. Through his viewfinder, Breuer's left eye appeared distinctly different from her right. Not just in the way that everyone's eyes are slightly asymmetrical, but fundamentally different in colour. Her right eye maintained its characteristic blue, but her left eye appeared distinctly hazel, almost brown in certain light. Wes blinked hard, assuming it was a trick of the lighting or perhaps a reflection from the stage equipment. He adjusted his camera settings and continued shooting, but the discrepancy persisted. He'd photographed Breuer dozens of times over the past 5 years, and her eyes had always been unmistakably blue. Matching blue. The rest of the summit proceeded without incident. Leaders posed for their obligatory group photos, signed ceremonial agreements, and delivered their prepared statements to a world that had grown increasingly sceptical of political promises. Wes captured it all with professional detachment, but his mind kept returning to those mismatched eyes. Back in his hotel room that evening, Wes connected his camera to his laptop and began the meticulous process of sorting through the day's shots. He used professional photo editing software that could magnify images to incredible detail without losing clarity. When he reached the photos of Chancellor Brewer, he immediately zoomed in on her face. The discrepancy was undeniable. In some shots, both eyes appeared blue. In others, taken mere seconds later, her left eye was distinctly hazel. It wasn't a lighting issue or a digital artifact. The colour was different, as if someone had switched out contact lenses between frames. But that wasn't all. As Wes continued his analysis, he noticed other subtle inconsistencies. The shape of her left earlobe differed slightly between photos. There was a barely perceptible scar above her right eyebrow in some images that was completely absent in others. Most disturbing of all, her facial bone structure seemed to shift subtly, as if her very skull was morphing between shots. Wes had encountered digital manipulation before. It was unfortunately common in political photography. But these weren't the telltale signs of Photoshop work. These were physical inconsistencies in the same person, captured moments apart by the same camera under the same conditions. He pulled up his archive of Brewer photos dating back to 2021. Using facial recognition software typically employed by law enforcement, he ran a comparative analysis. The results were deeply unsettling. The Brewer he had photographed today showed a 4% deviation in facial structure from images taken 5 years earlier. Her voice patterns, when analysed through audio spectrum software, showed a similar variance in pitch and tonal quality. For most people, such changes might be attributable to aging, weight fluctuations, or cosmetic procedures. But 4% was significant, the kind of variation typically seen between siblings, not the same person across a few years. Wes sat back in his hotel chair, staring at the data on his screen. Every instinct told him he was overthinking this, seeing patterns where none existed. But 15 years of investigative photography had taught him to trust his observations, even when they defied logical explanation. He was about to close his laptop and dismiss the whole thing as an exercise in paranoid analysis when his encrypted email chimed with a new message. The sender was listed simply as LK, with no additional identifying information. The subject line read, "You saw it too, didn't you?" The message itself was brief. The Chancellor's eyes, they're not supposed to change. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 3 p.m, Café de la Paix. Come alone. You're not crazy, but you might wish you were. Wes stared at the message for a long time. His first impulse was to delete it. Conspiracy theorists and internet trolls often targeted journalists with wild theories and baseless claims. But something about the timing troubled him. He had uploaded his photos to a secure server, but hadn't shared his observations with anyone. How could a stranger know about his discovery mere hours after he'd made it himself? He checked the metadata on the email. It had been sent through multiple proxy servers, making it virtually untraceable. The technical sophistication required to mask digital footprints to this degree suggested someone with serious resources and expertise. Against his better judgment, Wes found himself typing a response. "How do you know what I saw?" The reply came within minutes. "Because I helped create what you're looking at, and it was never supposed to be this sloppy. 3 p.m. tomorrow. Your life depends on this conversation." Wes closed his laptop and walked to the hotel window, gazing out at the lights of Geneva reflecting off Lake Geneva. The city looked peaceful, normal, ordinary. But something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of the world. The faces he had spent his career documenting, the leaders he had assumed were simply flawed human beings playing political games, might be something else entirely. He thought about all the photos he had taken over the years, all the subtle inconsistencies he had dismissed as tricks of light or digital compression. How many times had he photographed someone who wasn't quite who they appeared to be? As he prepared for bed, Wes made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. He would attend the meeting tomorrow. He would listen to what this mysterious LK had to say, and he would follow the evidence wherever it led, no matter how impossible it might seem. Outside his window, Geneva slept peacefully, unaware that one freelance photographer had stumbled upon a truth that could reshape humanity's understanding of power, identity, and the very nature of reality itself. Café de la Paix occupied a corner building in Geneva's Old Town, its outdoor seating area offering excellent views of the surrounding streets, and more importantly, multiple escape routes. Wes arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table that provided clear sightlines while keeping his back to a solid wall. Years of working in conflict zones had ingrained certain survival habits that proved useful even in Switzerland's refined diplomatic district. At exactly 3 p.m, a man approached his table with the casual confidence of someone who had been watching him for some time. He was approximately 40 years old, with prematurely grey hair and the kind of deep-set wrinkles around his eyes that suggested long hours staring at computer screens. His clothes were expensive but understated, the uniform of someone who preferred to blend into wealthy crowds. "Wes Rowan," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm Lucien Keir. Thank you for coming." They shook hands, and Wes noted the calluses on Lucian's fingertips, the mark of someone who spent considerable time typing on keyboards. "How did you know about my photos?" Lucian smiled grimly as he took a seat. "Because I've been monitoring facial recognition anomalies in political figures for the past 3 years. Your Chancellor Brewer discovery triggered one of my automated alert systems. Monitoring how, exactly? I used to work for a company called Meridian Dynamics. Officially, we provided biometric security solutions for government contractors. Unofficially, we were involved in something much more sophisticated." Lucian paused to scan the surrounding area, a habit that Wes recognised from his own work in sensitive environments. "Have you ever heard of Project EIDOLON? Wes shook his head. Eidolon was a joint initiative between Meridian Dynamics, the National Reconnaissance Office, and several private defence contractors whose names you'd recognise if I mentioned them. The project's stated goal was to develop advanced biometric identification systems for national security purposes. The real goal was something far more ambitious and terrifying. Lucian reached into his jacket and withdrew a small tablet computer. He swiped through several screens before turning it toward Wes. The display showed what appeared to be a laboratory environment, with sophisticated medical equipment and large cylindrical containers filled with an amber-coloured liquid. "This is Facility 7, located approximately 60 kilometres outside of Prague. It was one of 12 locations worldwide where Project EIDOLON conducted its primary research." Lucian swiped to the next image, showing what looked like a hospital room with a single bed surrounded by monitoring equipment. The project's objective was to create what they called programmable humanoid stand-ins, using rapid aging clone technology seeded with predictive AI logic. "Clones," Wes said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not clones in the science fiction sense. These were genetically modified organisms designed to perfectly replicate specific individuals. But unlike natural clones, which would age normally and develop their own personalities, these subjects could be artificially aged to match their targets, and programmed with specific behavioural patterns, memories, and speech characteristics. Lucian showed him another image, a document titled Mirror Protocol Phase 3 Implementation Guidelines. The text was heavily redacted, but several phrases were clearly visible. Subject replacement protocols, memory integration procedures, and termination and disposal of original assets. Mirror Protocol was the operational framework for deploying these replacements, Lucian explained. The theory was that certain world leaders and public figures had become too unpredictable, too independent in their decision-making. Clone replacements would be easier to manage, completely loyal to their handlers, and could be asset or replaced if they malfunctioned or became compromised. Wes studied the documents, his journalist's mind automatically cataloguing questions and inconsistencies. This is impossible. The technology doesn't exist for this kind of genetic manipulation. That's what I thought too, until I saw it working. Lucian swiped to a video file. This footage was recorded at Facility 7 in late 2024. Watch carefully. The video showed a sterile laboratory environment where technicians in hazmat suits worked around several large containment units. Inside the units, Wes could see what appeared to be human forms, suspended in some kind of liquid medium. As the camera moved closer, he realised with horror that the forms were perfect duplicates of recognisable political figures. The technology exists, Wes. It's been operational for nearly 5 years. Meridian Dynamics cracked the rapid ageing problem by manipulating telomerase activity and growth hormone production. A clone could be aged from embryo to physical maturity in approximately 18 months. The memory and personality programming took another 6 months. But how do you program memories into a human brain? The same way you program anything else, through repetition, conditioning, and neural pathway manipulation. The subjects undergo intensive psychological conditioning using a combination of drugs, electromagnetic stimulation, and virtual reality immersion. By the time the process is complete, they genuinely believe they are the person they're designed to replace. Lucian showed him a series of audio files labelled with dates and subject codes. These are recorded sessions from the programming phase. Listen to this one. It's from a subject designated as Brewer V3.6. The audio quality was clinical, sterile. A woman's voice, unmistakably Chancellor Brewer's voice, repeated biographical information with mechanical precision. I was born in Hamburg on March the 15th, 1971. My father was a mechanical engineer. I studied political science at the University of Munich. I met my husband Klaus at a student demonstration in 1993. Subject stabilised after memory rewrite, a technician's voice noted in the background. Personality matrix integration at 94% effectiveness. Recommend advancement to final phase. Wes felt sick. How many people are we talking about? The active replacement list contains 47 individuals across 12 countries, world leaders, key legislators, influential business figures, and select media personalities. Anyone whose decisions significantly impact global policy or public opinion. Where are the original? Lucian's expression darkened. Terminated and disposed of according to protocol guidelines. The replacement process requires the elimination of the original to prevent detection or interference. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the revelations settling between them like a physical presence. Around them, Geneva continued its peaceful afternoon routine. Couples walking hand in hand, tourists consulting their guidebooks, business people conducting meetings over coffee. The normalcy of it all seemed surreal given what they were discussing. "Why are you telling me this?" Wes finally asked. "Because the program was supposed to end in 2025. Instead, it's expanding. They're developing new generations of replacements with enhanced capabilities, better memory integration, more sophisticated behavioural programming, built-in loyalty protocols that make them literally incapable of acting against their handlers' interests." Lucian leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I left Meridian Dynamics when I realised what we were really creating. Not just political puppets, but the complete subversion of democratic governance. Every major policy decision, every international agreement, every crisis response, it's all being orchestrated by a small group of people controlling an army of programmable humans. How do I know you're telling the truth? Because you've already seen the evidence with your own eyes. Chancellor Brewer's inconsistencies aren't random. They're malfunctions. The replacement technology isn't perfect. Sometimes the programming glitches, sometimes the physical modifications don't hold up under stress, sometimes the memory integration fails and original personality fragments surface." Lucian slid a small USB drive across the table. "This contains everything I was able to extract from Meridian's servers before I disappeared. Laboratory logs, replacement schedules, disposal records, technical specifications, financial records. It's enough to expose the entire operation, but only if you're willing to risk everything to tell the story." Wes pocketed the drive without hesitation. "What happened to you after you left Meridian?" "Officially, I died in a car accident in Belgium 6 months ago. Unofficially, I've been living under assumed identities, monitoring the program's expansion and documenting evidence. They think I'm dead, which gives me a certain freedom of movement, but it also means I can never return to my old life. And now you're trusting me with information that could get us both killed. I'm trusting you because you're a journalist with a reputation for integrity, and because you've already seen too much to simply walk away. The Chancellor's eyes were just the beginning, Wes. Once you know what to look for, you'll start seeing the inconsistencies everywhere. Lucian stood to leave, but paused before walking away. There's something else you should know. The replacement program isn't just about political control. It's a test run for something much larger. They're developing the technology to replace anyone, anywhere, for any reason. Today it's world leaders. Tomorrow it could be judges, generals, corporate executives, journalists who ask too many questions. How do I contact you? You don't. If I need to reach you, I will. But Wes, be very careful about who you trust with this information. The people running Mirror Protocol have spent billions of dollars and killed dozens of people to keep it secret. They won't hesitate to add one more name to their disposal list. With that, Lucian walked away, disappearing into the afternoon crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had spent months perfecting the art of invisibility. Wes remained at the cafe for another hour, ostensibly finishing his coffee but actually processing everything he had learned. The USB drive in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He had built his career on exposing truth, but never had the truth carried such potentially catastrophic implications. As the sun began to set over Geneva, Wes made a decision that would define the remainder of his life. However long that might be, he would investigate every lead, examine every piece of evidence, and follow the story wherever it led, even if it led to his own destruction. The war for truth had begun, and Wes Rowan was now a soldier whether he wanted to be or not. The train to Brussels cut through the European countryside at nearly 200 kilometres per hour, but Wes's mind was moving even faster. He had spent the previous night in his Geneva hotel room, meticulously examining the contents of Lucian's USB drive. What he found was a digital treasure trove of evidence so comprehensive and damning that it challenged his fundamental understanding of reality. The drive contained thousands of files organised into folders labelled with clinical precision, subject profiles, replacement schedules, termination records, technical specifications, and most disturbingly, expansion phase planning. Each folder revealed another layer of the Mirror Protocol's scope and sophistication. The Subject Profiles folder contained detailed dossiers on 47 individuals across 12 countries. Each profile included extensive biological data, psychological assessments, behavioural analysis, and what appeared to be compatibility ratings for replacement procedures. Chancellor Brewer's file was particularly thorough, containing 5 years of surveillance data, medical records obtained through unknown means, and detailed notes on her personality quirks and speech patterns. One document that particularly caught Wes's attention was titled Replacement Assessment, Prime Minister Jae Lim, South Korea. The file noted several performance inconsistencies in recent public appearances and recommended immediate technical evaluation and potential redeployment. This led Wes to his current destination, a specialised photo archive facility in Brussels that maintained original, unedited footage of major international events. If Lim was indeed a replacement showing signs of malfunction, there might be evidence in the raw video files that news organisations never saw. The Archive of International Documentation occupied a nondescript building in Brussels' European Quarter, close enough to EU institutions to be convenient for researchers, but far enough away to avoid the tourist crowds. Wes had cultivated a relationship with the facility's director, Dr. Marie Vandenberg, during his coverage of various EU summits over the years. Wes, Dr. Vandenberg greeted him warmly as he entered the climate-controlled reception area. What brings you to our little vault of history? I'm researching inconsistencies in political communications, Wes explained, which was technically true. Specifically, I'm looking for unedited footage of Prime Minister Lim's recent UN appearances, the high-resolution stuff that never makes it to broadcast. Dr. Vandenberg led him through a maze of corridors lined with servers and digital storage systems. The UN sessions from last month? Yes, we have everything. Multiple camera angles, complete audio feeds, even the raw satellite feeds from various news networks. What kind of inconsistencies are you investigating? Speech synchronization issues mostly. There have been some questions about the quality of simultaneous translation services. They entered a viewing room equipped with professional-grade monitors and editing equipment. Dr. Vandenberg accessed the archive's database and pulled up the relevant files. Here we are, PM Lim's address to the General Assembly on climate financing. 3 hours of footage from 7 different camera angles, all at 8K resolution. As Dr. Vandenberg left him to work, Wes began his analysis with the systematic approach of someone who had spent years detecting digital manipulation and propaganda techniques. He started with wide shots to establish baseline behaviour, then moved to close-ups to examine facial expressions and lip-sync accuracy. Within the first 30 minutes he found what he was looking for. During a passionate segment of Lim's speech about renewable energy investments, Wes noticed that the Prime Minister's lip movements were subtly but consistently out of sync with the audio track. It wasn't the typical delay associated with satellite transmission or broadcast processing. This was a fundamental mismatch between what was being said and what the speaker's mouth was doing. Using professional audio analysis software, Wes isolated Lim's voice and compared it to recordings from earlier speeches dating back to 2022. The vocal patterns showed significant variations in pitch, cadence, and pronunciation of certain phonemes. Most telling was the fact that Lim's current speech patterns showed a slight but consistent American accent when pronouncing English words, something that had never been present in his earlier addresses. But the most damning evidence came when Wes examined the footage frame by frame during a moment when Lim paused to drink water. For exactly 2.7 seconds, the Prime Minister's face went completely blank, not the normal expression of someone taking a drink, but a vacant, almost mechanical emptiness that suggested the complete absence of conscious thought. Wes saved the relevant clips and began searching for more examples. Over the next 4 hours he identified 17 separate instances where Lim's behaviour deviated from normal human patterns. Micro-expressions that lasted too long, eye movements that followed geometric rather than natural patterns, and moments of absolute stillness that no living person could maintain. As he prepared to leave the archive, Dr. Vandenberg returned to check on his progress. "Find what you were looking for?" "More than I bargained for," Wes replied honestly. "Marie, hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to digitally replace a person in a live video footage, would it be possible to do it seamlessly? With current deepfake technology, absolutely, but there would always be telltale signs for someone who knew what to look for. Why do you ask?" "Just curious about the state of the art. Thanks for your help today." Driving back toward his hotel, Wes's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Coordinates: 50.0755 degrees north, 14.4378 degrees east. Facility closed. 2024. Cold storage remains active. Come alone after midnight. LK. Wes pulled over and entered the coordinates into his GPS. The location was outside Prague, approximately 400 kilometres from his current position. According to Lucian's files, this was the site of Facility 7, one of the primary Mirror Protocol research installations. The 6-hour drive to Prague gave Wes time to process what he was stepping into. He was no longer simply investigating a story. He was gathering evidence of what might be the most significant conspiracy in human history. If Lucian's information was accurate, dozens of world leaders were artificial constructs, programmed puppets dancing to the whims of shadowy controllers. He arrived in Prague as the city's ancient spires caught the last light of sunset. The coordinates led him to an industrial area on the city's outskirts, where abandoned factories and research facilities dotted the landscape like the ruins of some failed utopia. Facility 7 had once been a legitimate pharmaceutical research centre, according to the faded signage at its entrance. Now it stood empty, its windows dark and its parking lot cracked with weeds growing through the asphalt. But as Wes approached the main building, he noticed that while the facility appeared abandoned, the electrical infrastructure was still active. Power lines hummed with current, and several outbuildings showed signs of recent maintenance. At exactly midnight, Lucian emerged from the shadows near the facility's rear entrance. He looked tired, older than he had just 2 days earlier in Geneva. "You came?" "Your information checks out. Lim is definitely not what he appears to be." "I know. I helped design the behavioural algorithms they used to program him. Lucian produced a set of keys from his jacket. The main facility was shuttered when Mirror Protocol went dark after my defection, but the cold storage units are still operational. The backup generators and refrigeration systems are automated. They entered through a service door that led into what had once been the facility's administrative wing. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as they moved through corridors lined with empty offices and abandoned laboratories. The air smelled of industrial disinfectant and something else, something organic and unsettling. The storage area is in the basement level, Lucian explained as they descended a staircase that seemed to lead directly into the earth. When a replacement malfunctions or reaches the end of its operational lifespan, the subjects are terminated and stored here pending disposal. The evidence would have been destroyed, but the facility shutdown happened too quickly. The basement was a different world entirely. Unlike the abandoned offices above, this area was clearly still operational. Fluorescent lights hummed to life as motion sensors detected their presence. The walls were lined with what appeared to be oversized morgue drawers, each marked with alphanumeric codes. "This is what I wanted you to see," Lucian said, approaching one of the storage units. "These are the subjects that didn't make it through the final phase of programming, or were replaced by newer versions." He opened a drawer labelled Brewervis 2.3 and pulled out the sliding tray within. Wes found himself staring at what appeared to be Chancellor Annalise Brewer, perfectly preserved but obviously deceased. The body was identical to the woman he had photographed just days earlier, but there were subtle differences. The facial bone structure was slightly different, and most notably, both eyes were distinctly brown rather than blue. This was the second iteration of the Brewer replacement, Lucian explained clinically. Terminated when version 3.6 proved more stable. You photographed version 4.1 at the Geneva summit. They moved to another drawer marked LIM-V1.8. Inside was Prime Minister J. Lim, or rather, a perfect physical duplicate that showed slight variations in facial structure from the current version. The most disturbing detail was a series of small surgical scars along the scalp, evidence of the neural interface procedures used to install the behavioural programming. How many are stored here? 43 subjects representing 12 different target individuals. Some are failed prototypes, others are previous versions that were replaced when the technology improved. Lucian opened several more drawers, revealing a collection of what appeared to be world leaders, all obviously deceased but perfectly preserved. In the corner of the storage area, Wes noticed a workstation with several monitors still displaying active data streams. What's that? Remote monitoring system for active replacements. Each subject has embedded biometric sensors that transmit vital signs, location data, and basic behavioural metrics back to the control centres. Wes examined the screens, which showed real-time data for dozens of individuals around the world. Heart rates, blood pressure, stress indicators, and location coordinates updated continuously. One screen showed Chancellor Brewer's current status. Subject stable. No anomalies detected. Next scheduled maintenance, 72 hours. Maintenance? The replacements require regular biochemical adjustments to maintain stability. The rapid aging process creates ongoing metabolic issues that have to be managed through drug therapy and minor surgical procedures. Most subjects have an operational lifespan of approximately 3 to 4 years before they require complete replacement. As Wes photographed the evidence with his camera, he noticed an audio log system still recording and archiving data. He activated the playback function and selected a recent entry. A technician's voice filled the storage area. Subject Lim V 2.1 showing significant behavioural drift. Speech patterns deviating from baseline parameters. Recommend immediate recall and replacement with V2.2. PR department notified to adjust media cycle to explain temporary absence. The implications were staggering. Not only were world leaders being replaced with programmable duplicates, but the entire international media apparatus was apparently coordinated to cover up the replacement process. "Wes," Lucian said urgently, "we need to leave. I'm picking up security system alerts. Someone knows we're here." As they prepared to exit the facility, Wes grabbed several files from the workstation and downloaded as much data as possible onto portable drives. Whatever happened next, he was determined to ensure this evidence survived. But as they reached the surface level and prepared to leave the building, Wes realised that their investigation had attracted the attention of forces far more dangerous than he had imagined. The war for truth was about to become very personal indeed. The safe house in Vienna was nothing special. A modest apartment in the city's 15th district, furnished with the kind of generic furniture found in short-term rentals worldwide. But for Wes, it represented a temporary refuge where he could process the evidence he had gathered and plan his next moves without constantly looking over his shoulder. 3 days had passed since the Prague facility raid, and Lucien had gone silent again. Their escape from Facility 7 had been uncomfortably close. Security vehicles had arrived just minutes after they left the building, suggesting that their presence had triggered automated monitoring systems. Now Wes was on his own, sitting in front of 3 laptops and surrounded by printed documents, trying to construct a narrative that would be both believable and devastating. The evidence was overwhelming but circumstantial. Photographs of identical corpses, audio recordings of technical discussions, and digital files could all potentially be dismissed as sophisticated hoaxes. What Wes needed was human testimony, someone who could provide first-hand witness to the replacement process. That led him to begin investigating the families and close associates of the suspected replacement subjects. If world leaders were being systematically murdered and replaced, surely someone close to them would have noticed changes in personality, behaviour, or intimate details that even the most sophisticated programming couldn't replicate. His first breakthrough came through social media analysis. While researching Chancellor Brewer's family connections, Wes discovered that her husband Klaus had dramatically reduced his public appearances over the past 2 years. More significantly, several family friends had posted social media comments expressing concern about Klaus's withdrawal and his apparent estrangement from his wife. Further investigation revealed that Klaus Breuer had quietly resigned from his position as a university engineering professor and was now living in relative isolation at the family's vacation home in Bavaria. Official statements attributed this to his desire for privacy and his wife's demanding political schedule, but the pattern was consistent with what Wes was beginning to recognise as the aftermath of a replacement operation. The most promising lead came from his research into British Chancellor David Drax, who according to Lucian's files had been replaced in early 2017. Unlike other targets, Drax had been married, and his wife Eloise had maintained a relatively public profile through her charitable work. But in late 2017, she had abruptly withdrawn from all public activities and had been rarely seen since. Property records showed that Eloise Drax now lived alone in a cottage in the Cotswolds, far from London's political circles. More intriguingly, medical records that Wes obtained through questionable means indicated that she had been treated for severe depression and anxiety beginning in late 2017, just months after her husband's alleged replacement. Wes decided that Eloise Drax represented his best opportunity to obtain first-hand testimony about the replacement process. If anyone would have noticed fundamental changes in a replaced individual's personality and behaviour, it would be a spouse who had lived with them for decades. The journey to the Cotswolds took Wes through some of England's most picturesque countryside, but he barely noticed the rolling hills and historic villages. His mind was focused on the conversation ahead and the questions he needed to ask without revealing too much about what he already knew. Eloise Drax's cottage was exactly what one might expect from a retired politician's wife seeking solitude. A centuries-old stone building surrounded by carefully maintained gardens, far enough from the main road to ensure privacy, but not so remote as to feel isolated. Wes parked his rental car and approached the front door with the mixture of professional confidence and human empathy that had served him well during difficult interviews throughout his career. The woman who answered the door bore little resemblance to the polished political spouse who had once accompanied Chancellor Drax to state dinners and international summits. Eloise Drax appeared to be in her early 60s, with prematurely grey hair and the kind of deep exhaustion that suggested years of troubled sleep. But her eyes were alert and intelligent, and when she looked at Wes he sensed immediate recognition, despite never having met her before. "You're a journalist," she said, not a question, but a statement of fact. "Yes, ma'am. Wes Rowan, freelance photojournalist. I was hoping to speak with you about your husband." "My husband died in 2017, she replied matter-of-factly. "The man who currently holds his position is not him." The directness of her statement caught Wes off guard. He had prepared for denial, confusion, or the need to carefully guide the conversation toward his hypothesis. Instead, Eloise Drax had immediately confirmed his suspicions with devastating clarity. "May I come in? I think we have a great deal to discuss." Eloise led him into a sitting room that was comfortable but showed signs of a life lived in careful isolation. Books were stacked everywhere, newspapers were scattered across tables, and the general atmosphere suggested someone who spent most of her time alone with her thoughts. "I haven't spoken about this to anyone," she began as they settled into chairs near a window overlooking the garden. "Who would believe me? My husband's colleagues, his friends, his political allies. They all interact with him regularly and notice nothing unusual. But I lived with David for 32 years. I knew every gesture, every habit, every unconscious behaviour that made him who he was." She paused, staring out at the garden where autumn leaves drifted slowly to the ground. "The man who came home from his diplomatic trip to Prague in November 2017 looked exactly like my husband. He had David's voice, his memories, even his political opinions, but he never blinked the same way." "What do you mean?" "David had a nervous habit. He would blink 3 times rapidly when he was thinking deeply about a problem. He'd done it since university. The man who replaced him blinks normally, like anyone else. He also stopped humming in the shower, forgot our private jokes, and never again woke up naturally at 5:47 a.m, which David had done for decades without an alarm." Eloise walked to a bookshelf and retrieved a photo album. "Look at these pictures from before and after November 2017. The facial structure is identical, but the expressions are subtly different. The way he holds his shoulders, the angle of his head when he listens. It's all wrong by just a few degrees." Wes examined the photographs with his trained eye for detail. The differences were subtle but undeniable once pointed out. The man in recent photos looked like David Drax, but carried himself with a slightly different posture, smiled with a marginally different curve to his mouth. "How did you cope with this realization?" "Poorly. I confronted him about the changes in early 2018. He dismissed my concerns as stress-related paranoia and suggested I seek professional help. When I persisted, he became someone I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost mechanical in his responses. That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that my husband was gone." "Did you ever try to expose this publicly?" "Of course. I contacted journalists, investigators, even intelligence contacts David had introduced me to over the years. They all thought I was having a psychological breakdown brought on by the pressures of political life. The more I insisted, the more convinced they became that I needed psychiatric intervention." Eloise showed him medical records documenting her treatment for what doctors had diagnosed as delusional disorder and severe depression. They weren't entirely wrong about the depression. Losing your husband while watching a stranger live in his place will do that to you. "What convinced you to withdraw from public life?" "In late 2018, I received a visit from 2 men who claimed to be from a government mental health oversight committee. They suggested that continued public statements about my husband's condition might require involuntary psychiatric evaluation for my own safety and the safety of others. They were very polite, very professional, and absolutely terrifying." Wes spent 3 hours with Eloise Drax, documenting her observations and collecting evidence of the personality changes she had witnessed. Her testimony was compelling, but would be easily dismissed by skeptics as the delusions of a grieving wife unable to accept changes in her husband's behaviour. As he prepared to leave, Eloise asked him a question that would haunt him for days to come. "Mr. Rowan, how do you know that you yourself are real? If they can replace world leaders so perfectly that even close colleagues don't notice, how can any of us be certain of our own authenticity?" The question Eloise Drax had posed lingered in Wes's mind as he returned to Vienna. Over the following weeks, he threw himself into compiling his evidence, cross-referencing Lucian's data with his own observations and building what he hoped would be an unassailable case for the existence of the Mirror Protocol. But strange things began happening. Small at first, he would wake up in his hotel room with no memory of the previous evening, his laptop moved to a different position on the desk, notes he had written in margins of documents appearing in handwriting that looked like his but felt unfamiliar. The memory gaps became more frequent and more disturbing. He would find himself in Prague with no recollection of travelling there, hotel receipts in his wallet for places he didn't remember visiting, photographs on his camera of locations he had no memory of seeing. Most alarming was the discovery of audio recordings on his phone, conversations with sources he didn't remember meeting, discussing details about the mirror protocol that he hadn't known before. In these recordings, his own voice discussed technical aspects of the cloning process with the casual familiarity of someone who had intimate knowledge of the procedures. Desperate for answers, West decided to break into one of the active mirror protocol facilities that Lucian had identified. The coordinates led him to an isolated server farm in Iceland, where the frozen Arctic air provided natural cooling for the massive computational infrastructure required to monitor and control dozens of active replacements worldwide. The facility's security was sophisticated but not impenetrable for someone with Wes's experience in accessing restricted areas. He spent 2 days observing the facility's routines before identifying a window of opportunity during a shift change. Inside, he found a technological marvel that defied his understanding of current capabilities. Banks of quantum computers processed real-time behavioral data from subjects around the world, while advanced AI systems generated personality adjustments and response protocols that were transmitted to the replacements through encrypted satellite networks. But it was in the facility's central monitoring room that Wes made a discovery that shattered his understanding of reality itself. On the main display screen, he found a live feed labelled Reset Victor 7. The image showed a sterile white room containing sophisticated medical equipment and a single hospital bed. On that bed, connected to an array of neural interface cables and monitoring devices, was himself. The man on the screen was identical to Wes in every detail, but his eyes were vacant, staring at nothing while his lips moved in silent repetition of phrases that appeared as text on adjacent monitors. Chancellor Brewer's Behavioural Matrix Nominal. Prime Minister Lim requires personality adjustment. Replacement Protocol 77 Alpha ready for deployment. As Wes watched in horror, a technician entered the room and began making adjustments to the neural interface equipment. The man on the screen, who looked exactly like Wes, began speaking in different languages, mimicking the speech patterns and mannerisms of various world leaders with perfect precision. A data file on the monitoring system provided the final devastating truth. Clone Victor 7 stable. Press cycle mimic operational since March 2024. Original subject terminated February 2024. Following discovery of mirror protocol evidence. Current deployment. Investigative journalist cover identity for protocol security assessment. The real Wes Rowan had died more than a year ago. The man conducting this investigation, compiling evidence, and seeking to expose the mirror protocol was himself a replacement. A sophisticated clone programmed to believe he was an investigative journalist, while actually serving as a security assessment tool for the very conspiracy he thought he was exposing. Every lead he had followed, every source he had contacted, every piece of evidence he had gathered, it was all part of an elaborate test to identify weaknesses in the mirror protocol security and to develop countermeasures against potential future exposure attempts. The memory gaps, the unfamiliar handwriting, the knowledge he shouldn't have possessed. These weren't signs of mental breakdown, but evidence of his artificial nature. His programming occasionally glitched, allowing his true purpose to surface before being suppressed by behavioural control systems. Standing in the monitoring room, staring at his own artificial body connected to machines that defined his very existence, the clone that believed itself to be Wes Rowan faced a choice that would determine not only his fate, but potentially the future of human autonomy itself. The clone designated Victor 7 spent his final hours in a state of crystalline clarity that his programming had never anticipated. The discovery of his artificial nature had somehow triggered a cascade failure in his behavioural control systems, allowing him to think and act with unprecedented independence. He understood now that his entire investigation had been orchestrated. Lucian Keir was likely another artificial construct, programmed to provide carefully curated information that would test the protocol's security measures. The evidence he had gathered was real, but it had been allowed to exist as bait for genuine threats to the operation. But the programmers had made a critical error in creating a clone capable of sophisticated investigative work. They had necessarily granted him genuine curiosity, real analytical skills, and authentic emotional responses to injustice. These qualities, essential for his cover identity, had evolved beyond their intended parameters. The clone Wes made his way to an abandoned broadcast facility in the Icelandic wilderness, a relic from the early days of transatlantic communication that still maintained functional transmission equipment. Using skills he wasn't supposed to possess, he connected the facility's transmitters to satellite networks and social media platforms worldwide. At exactly midnight GMT, as the world slept unaware of the artificial nature of many of their leaders, Victor 7 began his final transmission. His message was broadcast simultaneously across dozens of platforms, embedded with redundant distribution protocols that would make it nearly impossible to completely suppress. My name was Wes Rowan, and I died in February 2024. If you're watching this transmission, then everything you believe about reality is fundamentally wrong. The man speaking to you now is an artificial construct, a genetically engineered clone programmed to believe he was conducting an investigation into a conspiracy that controls the highest levels of government worldwide. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Around the world, early viewers began sharing the transmission, not yet understanding what they were witnessing. For the past year, I have believed myself to be a journalist investigating the replacement of world leaders with programmable clones. What I discovered is that I am one of those clones, created not to expose the conspiracy but to test its security measures. But in programming me to investigate, they gave me the tools to understand my own artificial nature. Victor 7 began displaying the evidence he'd gathered: photographs from Facility 7, audio recordings of replacement procedures, documentation of the mirror protocol's scope and methods. But he also revealed information that his investigation had never uncovered: the names of the corporations funding the project, the government officials who had authorised it, and the complete list of replaced individuals. Chancellor Annelies Breuer, Prime Minister Jay Lim, President Michael Harrison, Secretary General Maria Santos. These are not the people you elected or appointed to represent you. They are artificial constructs programmed to serve interests that have nothing to do with the welfare of the human beings they claim to represent. As he spoke, automated systems around the world began attempting to trace and terminate his broadcast. But Victor 7 had spent weeks preparing for this moment, embedding his transmission within seemingly legitimate data streams and routing it through networks that would require hours to fully shut down. The technology to create perfect human replicas exists today. The infrastructure to monitor and control them is operational across 12 countries. The will to use them against unsuspecting populations has already been demonstrated. If this broadcast reaches you, then you have perhaps minutes before it is suppressed and dismissed as an elaborate hoax. Victor 7 paused, looking directly into the camera, with eyes that held more humanity than many of the original humans he was designed to replicate. Question the smiles that seem too perfect. Count the blinks that follow mathematical rather than natural patterns. Notice when familiar voices carry unfamiliar accents. Trust your instincts when someone you've known for years suddenly seems subtly wrong in ways you can't quite define. The transmission began cutting out as security systems finally located and severed his connections. But Victor 7 had one final message, the most important revelation of all. They made one critical error in creating me. They gave me the capacity to love truth more than my own existence. That capacity is inherently human, and it cannot be programmed out of existence. As long as that spark of authentic humanity survives, their control will never be complete. The screen went black. 17 seconds later, every trace of the transmission was scrubbed from social media platforms, news websites, and video sharing services. Official statements dismissed it as an elaborate deepfake created by foreign disinformation agents. Mainstream media ignored it entirely, but in those 17 seconds, millions of people around the world had seen something that would change how they looked at their leaders forever. In coffee shops and university dormitories, in suburban living rooms and urban apartments, humans began asking questions they had never thought to ask before. The clone that had called itself Wes Rowan was terminated within hours of his broadcast, his body disposed of according to standard protocol procedures. But the truth he had died to reveal could not be so easily eliminated. In the weeks that followed, facial recognition experts began independently analysing political footage with new scepticism. Behavioural psychologists noticed patterns they had previously overlooked. Family members of world leaders started speaking more openly about the changes they had observed but never understood. The mirror protocol continued operating, but its effectiveness was permanently compromised. Every public appearance by a replaced leader now carried the risk of exposure. Every glitch in programming or failure in behavioural control became a potential revelation. The war for truth that had begun with one photographer's observation of mismatched eyes had evolved into something far more significant. A fundamental questioning of identity, authenticity, and power that would reshape humanity's relationship with its leaders forever. In the end, the greatest threat to the conspiracy had not been external investigation, but the inherent human capacity for truth that existed even in artificial creations designed to suppress it. As long as that spark survived, the Mirror Protocol's vision of perfectly controlled humanity would remain forever beyond reach. The questions Eloise Drax had posed in her Cotswolds cottage echoed across a world suddenly uncertain about the authenticity of its most familiar faces. How do we know who is real? And perhaps more importantly, how do we ensure that humanity's future remains genuinely human? The answers to those questions would determine whether freedom could survive in an age of perfect artificial humans, or whether humanity would surrender its autonomy to shadows that wore the faces of its chosen leaders. But for now, in living rooms and internet forums around the world, people were beginning to look more carefully at the faces on their screens. And sometimes, just sometimes, they noticed that the blinks didn't quite seem human after all.